This video is part of our second series of presentations about the Book of Mormon. Because the prophet Joseph Smith taught the early church leaders that the Lehigh colony landed in South America, we have created this series of videos. Our theories and research is based on the truths from the Book of Mormon, but should not be considered as official church doctrine. The Temple of Nephi and the Temple of Koricancha, Part 3, the PreColumbian Temple. First, we'll take another look from the perspective of the Spanish chroniclers and others of what the Temple of Koricancha, or the Temple of the Sun, was like before Pizarro and the Spanish conquistadors came to Peru. Hernando de Soto and other early conquistadors were awestruck the first time that they saw the temple in the late afternoon with the sun gleaming off from the golden temple. It was obviously quite impressive to the Spanish, and they quickly went to work dismantling more than 700 panels of pure gold from off the exterior and interior walls of the temple. Some of these panels were a quarter to a half-inch thick and 2 feet by 4 feet, weighing between 10 and 25 pounds. The panels, like all of the beautiful golden temple artifacts, were melted down into ingots for shipment to Spain and distribution to the conquering army. On the beautiful stone walls of the temple can still be seen today the marks or places of attachment for the golden panels. This is a view of the Temple of Koricancha underneath the Catholic Cathedral Santo Domingo. Graciela de la Vega, in his book, The Incas, described the Temple of Koricancha as follows, and I quote, "All the Incas enriched this city, and among its countless monuments, the Temple of the Sun remained the principal object of their attention. They vied with one another in ornamenting it with incredible wealth, each Inca seeking to surpass his predecessor. Indeed, the splendors of this temple were such that I should not venture to describe them, had not all Spanish historians of Peru done the same. But nothing that they have written, nor anything that I might add, could ever depict it as it really was." Unquote. It appears that throughout the centuries, the various cultures and ruling civilizations all had a hand in enriching the Temple of Koricancha. It was a sacred place for all, and a depository of their spoils and precious treasures. Graciela de la Vega goes on to say, "The Temple of the Sun was located on the site that today is occupied by the Church of San Domingue, and its walls, which are made of highly polished stone, still exist. What we shall call the high altar, although this expression did not exist among the Indians, was to the east, and the roof, which was very high, was of wood covered with straw. The 4 walls were hung with plaques of gold from top to bottom, and a likeness of the sun topped the high altar. The likeness was made of a gold plaque, twice as thick as those that paneled the walls, and was composed of a round face, prolonged by rays of flames, the way the Spanish painters represent it. The whole thing was so immense that it occupied the entire back of the temple, from one wall to the other. There was no other idol in this temple, nor in any other, for the sun was the only god of the Incas, whatever people may say on this subject. When the Spanish entered Cusco, this likeness of the sun, as the result of a division of property, fell into the hands of one of the early conquistadors. On either side of the sun were kept the numerous mummies of former Inca kings, which were so well preserved that they seemed to be alive. They were seated on their golden thrones, resting on plaques of the same metal, and they looked directly at the visitor. The main door of the temple opened to the north, as it does today, and there were several others of less importance, which were used for services in the temple. All of these doors were covered with plaques of gold, and the walls of the building were crowned on the outside with a gold band 3 feet wide and went all around it. The temple was prolonged by a square cloister with an adjoining wall and crowned by a gold band like the one we have just described. The Spaniards replaced this by a plaster band of the same width that could be seen on the walls, which were still standing when I left Peru. The 3 other sides of the cloister gave on to 5 square rooms that had no communication between them, and they were roofed over in the form of a pyramid. The first of these rooms was dedicated to the moon, the bride of the sun, and for this reason it was the nearest to the main building. It was entirely paneled with silver, and a likeness of the moon with the face of a woman decorated it on the same way that the sun decorated the larger building. The Indians offered no sacrifices to her, but they came to visit her and begged her intercession as to the sister bride of the sun and to the mother of all the Incas. They called her Mama Kija, which means our mother the moon. The bodies of queens were laid away in this temple, just as those of the kings were kept in the other. Mama Okolo, the mother of Hunaina Capek, occupied the place of honor before the likeness of the moon, because she had given birth to such a son. The room nearest the moon was devoted to Venus. To the room nearest that of the moon was devoted to Venus, to the Pleiades, and to all the stars. As we said before, Venus was honored as the sun's page, who accompanies him on his way, now following him, now preceding him. The Indians considered the other stars as servants of the moon, and this was why they were represented near her. The constellation of Pleiades was particularly revered because of the regularity and perfection of its well-grouped design. This room was hung with silver, like that of the moon, and the ceiling was dotted with stars, like the firmament. The next room was dedicated to lightning and to thunder, which were both expressed by the single name Ijapa. If they said, "Did you hear Ijapa?" it was understood as thunder. "Did you see Ijapa?" or "Ijapa struck there," this meant lightning. Both were respected as the servants of the sun, just as the Gentiles used to consider lightning as Jupiter's own weapon. This room was entirely covered with gold, but neither lightning nor thunder were represented there, because they would not have known how to go about it. So this is a picture of the coin, the sol, which represents the sun in Peru. The fourth room was dedicated and devoted to the rainbow, which they said had descended from the sun, and which figured on the scutcheon of the Inca king. It was entirely covered with gold, and the rainbow was painted in beautiful colors across the entire surface of one of the walls. They called the rainbow Ichu and revered it very specially. When it appeared, they immediately put their hands over their mouths through fear. They said that it might make their teeth decay. I cannot say why. The fifth and last room was reserved for the high priest and his assistant, who were all of royal blood. They did not live there, but met there in council, either to give hearings or to decide upon the sacrifices and all that had to be done in connection with the service of the temple. This parlor was paneled with gold in the same way as the others, unquote, by Graciela de la Vega. Location of the Temple of Koricancha. Cusco is divided archaeologically into two city areas, Hanan Cusco and Huron Cusco. The lower city, Huron Cusco, is the oldest part of the city, or our city of Nephi. The Temple of Koricancha, or our Temple of Nephi, is located in the northernmost part of the highest area of the old cities. In the days of the conquistadors, the temple had a very high tower associated with it. The tower and its foundation is now completely gone. The Cusco Valley is a long, wide valley that increases in elevation to about 11,000 feet as it ascends to the north, with mountains circling around it. The Temple of Koricancha is located exactly as the requirements with the Temple of Solomon. It is actually the navel of the puma in the ancient layout of the city. It is situated in the highest place of the most northern area of the old part of the city, literally at the tops of the mountains. The newer city, or Hanan Cusco, or Shiloh of the Book of Mormon, is centered 10 blocks further north at the crest of the valley. This newer part of the city of Cusco was built later by the wicked King Noah when he constructed many beautiful and spacious buildings. Today, the Plaza de Armas, or the main city square, is the center of Cusco City, where the Catholic Cathedral and other important government buildings are located as well. This Hanan Cusco, or Shiloh, is contained at the extreme northern end of the resort or fortress of the modern-day Saskatchewan, with its 3 high towers. Importance of the Temple of Koricancha. Today, the local native inhabitants of Cusco have a unique feeling about the ancient Temple of Koricancha. It has not been forgotten by the faithful Peruvian, even though for nearly 4 centuries a Catholic cathedral has been built over the top of their precious temple. They revere the sacred temple as the center of their Inca religion and the most important and sacred place in not just Cusco, but in all of Peru and South America as a whole. Today, many modern native groups do not like the fact that the Catholic Church has control of and ownership of the Temple of Koricancha and are trying to influence the political powers to give this priceless legacy back to the native people. Here are some comments from one such group. Raimundo Bejar Navarro, an archaeologist, climbs the adobe wall up onto the grounds of the Santo Domingo Monastery here in the center of town. Shaking his head, he complains that the four resident monks are refusing to let his scientific team dig in the area. Defiantly looking up at the towering 350-year-old Spanish church, he hisses through his teeth, "They should tear this down." The reason for such emotion is that the Santo Domingo Cathedral and monastery sit atop the holiest shrine of the Inca Empire, the Temple of the Sun, or the Temple of Koricancha in Quechua. And Mr. Bejar is leading a 3-year effort to restore the temple. Until conquered by the Spanish, the Temple of the Sun was the center of the vast Inca Empire that stretched from northern Venezuela to Patagonia in southern Argentina. Here was the repository of the realm's gold treasure, showcase of its exquisite stone carving technology, and central seat of the government. As was customary when the Spaniards conquered an area, they imposed Catholicism on the Inca and used the Koricancha structure as a church. In 1650, an earthquake destroyed part of the Dominican church, so the Spanish tore most of the temple down and used the finely cut stones to build the existing church and monastery. In 1953, another quake hit the building. Many of the Spanish-built walls collapsed, revealing parts of the original structure hidden for centuries. In reconstructing Santo Domingo, church officials agreed not to build on some of the existing Inca walls. For Jesus Cheque, a Quechua Indian working on the digging project, the idea of the Santo Domingo church resting atop the Inca temple is a bitter one, and he says flatly that he wants the church tore down. "It's the symbol of the oppression of our culture, the abuse of my Andean past," he said. "Where is my place to worship? They have stolen the stones of my temple." The temple of God has always been considered as sacred or holy ground. We have complete reverence and respect for those hallowed places in all the world. The first known reference to the tradition of removing your shoes before entering such a place was when Moses communicated with God on Mount Sinai. The account goes as follows. "And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground." Exodus chapter 3, verses 4 to 5. This place of the burning bush was holy ground. In like manner, it was unlawful to go into the Temple of Koricancha or approach its sacred ground without having removed your shoes. It is probably not a coincidence that this phenomenon of removing your shoes to approach the temple is unique. It is the only known place in South America with a similar tradition. The chronicler Graciela de la Vega says of the temple, "It was forbidden to enter the grand area, or the temple itself, without first having removed one's shoes. Mention should also be made of a cross street running east and west that cut across the 4 roads to the temple, at one particular point beyond which it was forbidden to continue with one's shoes on. From this point to the entrance of the temple, properly speaking, there remained about 200 steps to be taken." Unquote. The altar of Santa Rosa and the wash basin. The Temple of Koricancha has an interior courtyard where the altar of Santa Rosa is located, and it is the possible location for one of the entrances to the secret tunnels. The courtyard had a fountain or wash basin, originally located with the sacred altar for sacrifices. Koricancha Temple Garden. The Spanish chroniclers from the 16th century talk about how beautiful the temple gardens of Koricancha were. The gardens were the depository of much precious treasure, comprised of statues of golden animals, flowers, stalks of corn, etc. The Spanish conquistadors could not believe the beauty of this sacred garden, with its 5 flowing fountains. It was confirmation that they had found their Eldorado, their city of gold. This was the temple of God for the Native Americans in the land of promise. It was truly their holy place, the temple of their God.